On the border, the religious world maintained one was not allowed to be both a Jew and a Christian at the same time. Some who have lived on the border have reluctantly been claimed by one community or the other. All these who have lived on the border have made their parent communities nervous by their insistence on settling in this land. This is an introduction to a people whose story has not been told. So despite declarations that nobody was allowed to live on the border, many have. The level of personal and institutional antagonism in the first part of this series should give us pause. If God's purpose is not moved forward by bitterness and hatred, there's been a significant failure in discipleship by those who have claimed to be God's people. Part 2 is going to investigate those who have refused to live by the rules of the religious gatekeepers. Contrary to what the establishment believes, many of those who have lived in the land between Christianity and Judaism have lived in a land far more populated than one might expect. Some saw the possibility of this borderland being developed, like John Toland, who had suggested as early as 1718 that Christians from among the Jews should observe the Torah. It would be over a century before this would start to develop. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte wrote a letter inviting the Jewish people to move to Palestine under the protection of the French government. He wrote, "Hasten. Now is the moment which may not return for thousands of years to claim the restoration of civil rights among the population of the universe which has been shamefully withheld from you for thousands of years, your political existence as a nation among nations, and the unlimited natural right to worship Jehovah in accordance with your faith publicly and most probably forever." In the wake of this unexpected invitation, there arose a more public interest in the restoration of the Jewish people back to the ancient homeland. Bonaparte did not have military victory in the Middle East, which would have allowed him to implement this offer, but an offer from a powerful secular European ruler started to stir an idea among the Jews and Bible-reading Christians of what could be possible. A spiritual hunger caused a greater interest in the borderlands. Here are some of the border pioneers. Ignaz, also known as Isaac Lichtenstein, became a rabbi in northern Hungary before he was 20 years old. He settled in Tapioțel as the district rabbi where he served for 40 years. A Jewish teacher in his community had a New Testament which the rabbi had seized and threw across his office. 30 years later, a fierce outbreak of anti-Semitism broke out in Hungary. This resulted in a situation where 12 Jewish men and a Jewish woman were thrown into prison accused of having killed a Christian girl to use her blood for ritual purposes. The blood accusation in Tiza Eslar proved to be baseless. In response to this, Rabbi Lichtenstein wrote, "The wicked practices of evil men wearing the name of Christ only to further their evil designs arouse the indignation of some true Christians who, with pen on fire and warning voices, denounce the lying rage of the anti-Semites. In an article written by the latter in defense of the Jews, I often met with passages where Christ was spoken of as he who brings joy to the man, the Prince of Peace, and the Redeemer, and his gospel was extolled as a message of love and life to all people. I was surprised and scarcely trusted my eyes when I spied in a hidden corner the Bible which some 30 years before I had taken in vexation form from a Jewish teacher, and I began to turn over its leaves and read. How can I express the impression which I then received? Not the half had been told me of the greatness, power, and glory of this book, formerly a sealed book to me. All seemed so new, and yet it did seem to me good, like the sight of an old friend who has laid aside his dusty, travel-worn garments and appears in festive attire, like a bridegroom in wedding robes or a bride adorned with her jewels. Lichtenstein continued to serve as rabbi in his local district and publicly wrote urging European Jewry to embrace Yeshua as Messiah. During the last 20 years of his life, he proclaimed Yeshua to his Jewish community. Despite organized opposition to his belief in Messiah, Lichtenstein continued to identify with the Jewish community in Hungary even after being removed from his position as district rabbi. Rabbi Elijah Zvi Slovacek was part of the Slovacek dynasty, an illustrious family of rabbis from Lithuania that included Rabbi Joseph Dov Ber Slovacek, known simply as the Rav, the leader of the modern Orthodoxy in America. As a family member, Rabbi Elijah was forgotten for a reason: his love of Jesus Christ. Indeed, Rabbi Elijah was an enigmatic traditional rabbi who in the middle decades of the 19th century wrote a commentary to parts of the New Testament, including Matthew and Mark, and a book, Kol Kor, which argues for symmetry between Judaism and Christianity. Rabbi Elijah argues there is nothing in Christianity that is alien to Judaism. Rabbi Elijah, the traditional rabbi from Lithuania, spoke very positively of Christianity and predates many other Jewish scholars who would end up investigating Yeshua. He's more sympathetic than many Reform rabbis who published on Jesus in the mid-19th century, including Joseph Salvador, Abraham Geiger, Claude Montefiore, Kaufman Kohler, Isaac Mayer Weiss, and Joseph Krauskampf. Slovacek was comfortable even with the doctrine of the Trinity. He was not necessarily interested in the historical Jesus, but more in Christianity itself. He wrote his work on Judaism and Christianity, Kol Kor, in Hebrew and first published it in French, English, German, and Polish translations before publishing the original Hebrew version. The English version appeared as the Law, the Talmud, and the Gospel in 1868, and he gave it to a Protestant publishing house on the condition that they publish it without his name on it. Boaz Michael of First Fruits of Zion also wrote about Slovacek, saying, "The importance of Slovacek's work in terms of restoring a Jewish reading of the Gospels should be obvious to everyone. His work is also important for the purpose of introducing Jewish readers to the Jewish Yeshua from an Orthodox perspective. Ordinarily, Jewish scholars who write about Jesus do so from an academic and liberal perspective, touting interfaith dialogue but not actually believing in the validity of the New Testament. Slovacek wrote as a devout Orthodox Jew who also happened to believe the Gospels. We may not agree with all of his conclusions, but he is a forerunner in Messianic Jewish thought and needs to be translated and preserved." Rabbi Elijah Slovacek shares his heart in the following excerpt. "Thus, and I repeat this with regret, Jews and Christians are equally illogical in their attacks against me. For who am I, after all, that you complain against me? Not against me are your complaints, but against truth and peace, my only objectives. David distinctly wrote in one of his Psalms, 'All my desires are for peace, even though I wage war against men. I only do so for the purpose of obtaining peace. All right then, me too. I am here to give battle to the old commentators of the New Testament. It is to restore peace and understanding between men whose false teachings have for too long divided them.'" In a recent article from Tablet magazine, Shaul Magid, in his evaluation of Rabbi Elijah Slovacek, summarizes, "Obviously written for a Christian as well as a Jewish audience, his work attracted a large readership among Christians, many of whom reprinted his writings and viewed his works as vindicating Christianity from centuries of Jewish polemical critique. He writes in his introduction to the commentary on Matthew that he wrote the book to show everyone that the New Testament only comes to show that the root of existence is the unity of God, and also to strengthen the law of Moses. More than that, he continues, I published this commentary to Matthew in Hebrew for Jews to introduce them to the New Testament who, until now, have not recognized its beauty. It seems he wanted Christians to understand their scripture anew through sympathetic Jewish eyes and to educate his Jewish readers about their misunderstanding of Christianity. Rabbi Yekel Lichtenstein is another pioneer. Now, it's a little confusing that we have two Rabbi Lichtensteins, but this Rabbi Lichtenstein is a different Rabbi Lichtenstein than the other Lichtenstein. Rabbi Lichtenstein was born in Moldova around 1830. He was famous for his learning as a child prodigy. He came to faith in Yeshua in the 1850s, having served already as a wonder rabbi in Jassy, Romania for a short period of time. It is this Lichtenstein who handed his friend Joseph Rabinowitz a Hebrew New Testament with the words, "Who knows? Perhaps he really is the one whom the prophets have foretold." In the 1850s, this had no effect upon Rabinowitz, who we will treat shortly. Lichtenstein married Rabinowitz's sister, who died shortly after, and afterwards, Rabinowitz and Lichtenstein did not get along together. Lichtenstein became a scholar and a teacher at the Institutum Judaicum in Leipzig, Germany. The objective was to educate theological candidates for ministry and Jewish evangelism. Lichtenstein primarily taught three disciplines: the New Covenant in Hebrew. He taught about the Jewish work Faith Strengthened by Isaac Troche, and taught about the Toldot Yeshu literature. It must be said, to Lichtenstein's credit, that he was the first Jewish believer to have a commentary in Hebrew which covered the whole of the New Covenant and have it published. It was and is difficult to understand. It mainly consists of notes on difficult passages in the New Covenant, incorporating an attack on faith strengthened and German liberal theology. In the words of the student Dane Axel Bülow, who had studied there between 1886 and 1887, Bülow said, Lichtenstein had himself worked out a sort of interpretation of the New Testament which was not easy to grasp. Through his Jewish eyes, Jesus looked different than the Jesus of the Goyim, the Gentile Christians, and the way they saw Jesus. In Lichtenstein's eyes, Jesus was a Jew and had Jewish features. To his mind, a Jesus-believing Jew was a Ben Yisrael, a son of Israel, which is what he himself remained after coming to faith in Jesus. With this conviction, Lichtenstein became a stranger in a double sense. He did not want to alienate himself from his fellow Jews, but this is exactly what happened, much to his distress. His views also caused many Goyim, or many of the nations, to regard him as a stranger among them. It is a Lichtenstein full of resignation who shortly before his death said, "The Jews can read his commentary on the New Testament, but they do not want to. The nations would like to, but cannot." Toward the end of the 19th century, Joseph Rabinowitz of Kishinev would establish a Jewish synagogue which integrated faith in Yeshua. Rabinowitz had been given a copy of the New Covenant by the hands of Rabbi Lichtenstein in the 1850s. He would take a trip decades later to Palestine. Heading to Israel with Zionist expectations, he described, "On the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, he made the matchless discovery. Jesus was Israel's king, and the Messiah, he was the brother of the Jews, and the answer to the Jewish question." Rabinowitz saw that the key to the land of Israel was being held in the hand of Yeshua. Rabinowitz insisted that his turn toward Yeshua as the brother of the Jews was an independent Jewish act and not influenced by Christian missionary organizations. The development of Rabinowitz's faith and the subsequent establishment of a Yeshua-centered house of prayer in Kishinev would be publicized by Franz Delitzsch, scholar and translator of the New Covenant into Hebrew. Rabinowitz became the father of what would develop into the Messianic Jewish movement when he stressed that he and those like-minded with him desired liberty to observe Jewish customs handed down from their fathers insofar as these were not at variance with the spirit of Christianity. During World War II, there were Bulgarian adaptations of the Nuremberg laws. The Bulgarian government announced they were joining the Axis powers, and German Nazi forces entered Bulgaria without firing a single shot. An edict was published that every male Jew must report to work brigades, which were forced labor camps. Rabbi Daniel Zion, as the spiritual leader of the Jewish community, became an object of persecution and ridicule. He was taken and publicly flogged in front of the great synagogue of Sofia. During these times, Rabbi Daniel walked upright before the fascists, and his only reaction was to call on God. According to Rabbi Zion, a major change came into his life when, as he was praying, a vision of Yeshua appeared to him. He did not know what this vision meant, so he asked some of the other rabbis what he should do about it. After the third time that the same vision reappeared, Rabbi Daniel turned toward the figure and spoke to him. The figure was scintillating right out from the sun, and the impression that Rabbi Daniel received from this figure is that it spoke back to him, identifying himself as Yeshua. The bizarre nature of this vision forced the rabbi to investigate and try to understand what God was positioning before him. Rabbi Daniel's faith in Yeshua the Messiah became a well-known secret in the Jewish community of Bulgaria. However, his position was so honored and his services so highly esteemed that none of the Jewish functionaries in Sofia could openly criticize the rabbi. And because he remained well within the framework of the Jewish community in Bulgaria and did not stop living as an Orthodox Jew in all the rigor of the strictest observance of Torah, there was little that his opponents could point to as heresy. Developments were in place for the extermination of the Bulgarian Jews, and they all knew it. The government of Bulgaria made a decision under German pressure to send the Jews outside of Bulgaria. Rabbi Daniel and his secretary wrote a letter to the king of Bulgaria, and in this letter, Rabbi Daniel begged the king in the name of Yeshua not to allow the Jews to be taken out of Bulgaria. Rabbi Daniel wrote in this letter that in a vision that he had seen, Yeshua had told him to warn the king from delivering the Jews to the Nazis. On May 23rd, Rabbi Daniel Zion also gathered all the Jews in the Central Synagogue of Sofia, which is the second largest synagogue in all of Europe. Every Jew in the city came to the synagogue to pray for the evil decision to be reversed. Rabbi Daniel said publicly to all the community, "It is better for us to die here than in Poland." When the Jews came out of the synagogue, the police attacked the multitude with truncheons and arrested about 250 men. The people continued to march toward the Holy Synod and demanded to see the Metropolite Stephen, who was respected by the Jewish community because of his friendly attitude toward them. The Metropolite Stephen promised the Jewish community that he would meet with the king and the ministers and attempt to influence them to change their attitude and stop the persecution of the Jews. However, on May 25th, 1943, the expulsion of the Jews from Sofia began. The Commission for Jewish Affairs took 10,153 Jews from Sofia and 3,500 men from the provincial cities into the labor camps. In Sofia remained only 2,300 Jews. The Bulgarian Orthodox Church was one of the major stumbling blocks in the way of the Bulgarian government to send the Jews to Auschwitz. King Boris went to Germany for a meeting with the Nazi government and Hitler himself. As King Boris III of Bulgaria stood his ground, he did not submit to the Nazi pressure to deliver the Jews from Bulgaria to the death camps of Poland and Germany. Rabbi Tzion organized the Jews of Bulgaria, who respected him as the man who kept them alive during the Holocaust. Standing before them, he said, "My brothers, my dear sisters, we are now going to make mass aliyah. We are going to leave Europe and the diaspora, and we are going to come up to the land of Israel. We are going to ascend to our destiny." They followed in mass. A community had been spared by a miracle and followed their dear rabbi happily to the land of Israel. Rabbi Tzion came to Israel as a hero. In Bulgaria, unlike the tragedy that befell most European communities, the Jewish community remained intact. Rabbi Tzion was established as the chief rabbi of Jaffa. He also had his congregation in his own synagogue, and they followed the rabbi who had saved their lives, who made it possible for them to breathe the clean air of Israel. They were willing to listen to their rabbi's explanations that their lives had been saved by Yeshua. The impact of this story and many others like it indicates that there have been people who have been living in the borderlands. There have been people who have been doing what the church and the synagogue says is impossible. There is not time on this video to go into the deeds of Augustus Neander, of Alfred Edersheim, of Franz Delitzsch, of Adolf Safir, of Samuel Sharansky, of Chaim Ephraim, of David Barron, of Felix Mendelssohn, of Benjamin Disraeli, of Paul Philip Leveroff, and many others.